We are live. So for all of you joining now, you're getting this experience live. Of course, for if you're listening back to the show later, we did this right away after the Union Berlin game. Matt on location. Manu Werf here, joined by Stefan Bienkowski, Matt Port at the Alte Försterei in Köpenick. And I'm going to keep the introductions really short, so I'm not even going to ask how you guys are doing. I'm sure you're doing great. I know Matt is a little bit time constrained here because he is, the space, the Alte Köpenick is small. So you're somewhere between the press conference room and the mixed zone, and I know people are going to come in there soon. So, Matt, how was the game? Big Dortmund was it?
Ultimately, really, really comfortable win for Borussia Dortmund. I think anyone from a Borussia Dortmund perspective, particularly after that performance in midweek away at Tottenham, which was really, really disappointing from start to finish, from back to front, in terms of the attitude and the general approach that Dortmund had to that game was really, really disappointing. Today was a really good response to that. We've just been speaking to Nico Schlotterbeck here in the mix zone. And he he described the game in midweek in London as children's football, whereas today he said that he thought Dortmund had a very, very grown up and very adult approach to the game. So it's a tough place to come, which is correct. Dortmund is only actually Dortmund's third win here ever in 7 attempts. They've lost here on 4 occasions, so it is obviously a difficult place to come. It must be said, in general, they thought today they 90% absolutely had the game very much under control. Obviously, it helps when you get that early penalty decision going your way, as Dortmund did when Serhou Guirassy battled his way through. And I've not seen a replay yet, but it did look to me like it was a penalty. Weren't massive protests from the Union Berlin players and Emre Can, as he did in the last minute against St Pauli in the Bundesliga last week, steps up to take the penalty and put Dortmund ahead. And they never really looked back. Goals in the second half from Nico Schlotterbeck, really powerful header in off the crossbar, and then a really good finish from Maxi Bayer to cap off a really good Dortmund move, to cap off a 3-0 win. Standout player for me, though, for Borussia Dortmund today, Felix Metscher. Thought he was very, very impressive in midfield. Some of those really powerful penetrative runs that he does. He's such that big frame and big strides. He's great to watch when he really gets into his flow. So he posed a constant threat through midfield and also down the left-hand side a little bit for Borussia Dortmund today, which Union Berlin couldn't handle. In particular, Union Berlin's centre-back, Querfeld, who was completely robbed of possession by Felix Metscher on the edge of his own box. And to be perfectly honest, Metscher, he should have shot. And this was right in front of me at the position that I was in the press box. And I thought, mate, you've got into the box here, get a shot away on goal. But he opted to play it to Serhou Guirassy, who in turn opted, I think, to play it back to, I think it was Julian Ryerson joining the attack. And the whole thing just broke down. And that was at 1-0, and that was before half time. So I sort of thought at that point, this is sort of a typical Dortmund situation where they've missed a great chance to go 2 up and they could end up paying the price. But ultimately they didn't, because they had it all under control.
Matt, Torstian Figen said, found the game tight, but a consistent feel of how the game felt, with Dortmund not in complete control, but enough control not to be in trouble. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I would see it starting more positively from a Dortmund perspective. I thought Union's only threats really came from a couple of dead balls, particularly in the first half. And only because Dortmund's marking in the box was a little bit loose. I can't remember who. I think it was Illich who had a header in the opening 10 minutes, which was a free header in the box, which went straight at Gregor Kobel. I think if that goes either side of Kobel and Union Berlin take the lead, you potentially have a very, very different scenario on your hands here. But it wasn't the case. And I thought Union. I thought were relatively poor. I think there's an explanation for that. Stefan Baumgart was asked, I think it was before the Stuttgart game or before the Augsburg game, at some point on Union Berlin's trip around South Germany across the entire of last week that they had, where he said that Union Berlin are not a possession-based team. They will never be a possession-based team. And I think coming into this game today, they'd only had more possession in a game 3 times in the entirety of this season. They actually had more possession today So for only the fourth time this season, Union Berlin have had more possession, but you can tell it's absolutely not their game. They are much better hitting the teams on the break, and I feel like Dortmund maybe played into their hands really well in a positive sense from Dortmund's point of view. I think they did well to give Union the ball in the areas where they knew Union wouldn't be able to hurt them. So I think from that point of view, I think it was a largely controlled performance from Dortmund.
Yeah, you're right. According to the Bundesliga.com stats page, Union Berlin are last with 41% possession on average.
Yeah, which generally speaking suits them, and it's a credit to how they play, and it's why they're having such a comparatively good season. They came into today 5 games unbeaten, with a couple of, I think, particularly given the amount of travel they had to do to Augsburg away on a Thursday night, Stuttgart away on a Sunday night. They came from behind to get twice, both times I think to get 2 points out of those trips, which I think on balance you would accept it as Union Berlin, taking a point from each of those games. So, and obviously before that they'd had the 2-2 in Mainz. They'd come off 2 wins against Cologne and against Red Bull before Christmas. They are doing okay. Union Berlin, but today I think Dortmund played a bit of a trick on them, really, in giving them more of the ball, knowing that it wouldn't cause them too many problems.
Stefan, that's not really Dortmund's play either. I gotta look at that same stats page. I think they're 4th with 52% average possession. But yet, I actually always, I don't know how you saw it, but I felt that Dortmund were very much in control of the game, even though they didn't have the ball.
I mean, yeah, I completely agree with what Matt said. I think the kind of back and forth nature of it actually suited Dortmund, because going into this match, there was so much discussion about how Dortmund continually kind of drop points, continually concede kind of late goals. I think if I'm not mistaken, they're actually best in the league at scoring goals in the first half. I think they've more or less won every single game if you were to kind of judge it based on performances in the first half of football matches. All of Dortmund's problems have always come in the second half, and I think that kind of comes about because they're a reasonably decent team with keeping possession, but they're not a very good team actually closing out games, because they're not this all-encompassing possession side a la Pep Guardiola's Manchester City or Guardiola's Bayern Munich, or indeed Xabi Alonso's Leverkusen side from a couple of years ago. They don't really have that same capacity to kind of strangle a football match, and I think that's why so many times this season we've seen them kind of really struggle in the last kind of 20 minutes of games. But as Matt said there, Union Berlin just kind of throw everything at these games from get-go. They don't keep possession, they go very direct. And that's kind of, I guess technically I might be wrong because the possession stats suggest otherwise, but I think Kovac sets his Dortmund teams up to be very direct. He plays with more or less 3 strikers. He plays with, a settled midfield, which kind of are happy to sit deep. He's got centre halves and fullbacks who are happy to lump the ball up the pitch. And tonight it worked really well because you had Guirassy playing with Silva playing off him and Maximilian Bayer. That's 3 strikers. And I mean, I can only echo what Matt said, but I'd also kind of take a minute to shout out Fabio Silva, who I thought was particularly outstanding in the first half. And I was saying in our group chat, or either our group chat or the subscriber chat, that it's the first time in months that I've seen Guirassy actually have any sort of chemistry with another Dortmund forward. He's so used to just kind of looking like this kind of exasperated striker with his hands in the air every time, Adeyemi goes off on one of his runs or shoots from 40 yards out or something. But you could see Fabio Silva is a second striker through and through. He's a guy who's happy to play off a striker. There was actually a few occasions where he actually gave the ball back to Guirassy after Guirassy laid it off to him, where he probably should have picked another pass, but you could see he's just got that kind of wired into him to kind of play off the striker. And I thought Guirassy was really instrumental in that first half. He obviously didn't score, but he got a lot more touches than he's used to. He was getting Dortmund up the pitch. He was kind of feigning injury, shall I say, at times, or kind of, what's the word? Encouraging fouls, if you will, from the Union Berlin players. So I thought he looked almost back to his old self to the extent, and I don't think that's a coincidence that Fabio Silva was playing alongside him. But yeah, on the whole, I think Union's just style of football really suited Dortmund, to be honest with you. And I did kind of go in at halftime thinking, and I have to kind of agree with what the subscriber said. I actually thought it was a bit of a kind of back and forth game. And as Matt suggested there, like Union had at least one close header in the box, maybe 2 in the first half. And I did think, yeah, and I think I actually said at half time in the subscriber chat that Union looked really, really dangerous from set pieces. And I wouldn't have been surprised if they had gone on and scored in the second half. But, Dortmund then do it themselves. Nico Schlotterbeck scores, which I thought was a goal that the goalkeeper probably should have stopped, to be honest with you. So maybe got a bit lucky with that one. But yeah, it's a performance, and it's a result that Dortmund desperately need, I think, after this week. But yeah, the only thing I'd also add is just pre-match as well. I thought Baumgart was very, very complimentary of Dortmund. In fact, he actually went out of his way to defend Niko Kovac and said, everyone's kind of saying there's this crisis at Dortmund, but they're second in the league. They've only lost, one game, I think, in the league this year. And he basically said, look, they're still the second best team in the country by a mile. And I guess they played like it tonight.
I was absolutely not surprised to see, with all due respect, Stefan Baumgart praising Niko Kovac. I feel like those two would probably get on extremely well over a beer. I suspect.
Did you see what happened on the sideline? They did not look like coaches that were playing against one another. There were several times where they were in arms and making jokes, and it's wait, you guys realize that you opponents, right?
I feel like if there's any bromance to take place in the Bundesliga, it's absolutely between Stefan Baumgart and Niko Kovac. On that note of players and coaches getting on with each other, there was one player who wasn't getting on well with anybody today at the Alte Försterei, and that was Borussia Dortmund captain Emre Can. Obviously praised him earlier for the way he stepped up and put his penalty away, but then he got himself involved in an almighty scuffle in the second half where he ended up shoving one Union Berlin player to the ground. I think he thought that his hands weren't raised higher than they were, in which case the colour of the card may have been a bit different. And then in the wake of that, he then perhaps predictably came in for all sorts of abuse from the Union Berlin ultras on the Waldseite behind the goal. I'm not going to repeat exactly what they were saying to him, but it was regarding his mother, and it was clear. It was clear for all to hear. And at one point, then while this was going on, Emre Can actually pulled off a really, really neat piece of defending in his own box, so right in front of the Union ultras, got in front of his man, cleared the ball really well, good piece of defending, and having done that, turned to the Union Berlin fans and gave some sort of big gesture to them, which, when you're looking at it, I'm always in two minds at that point. Part of me thinks, mate, you're the captain of Borussia Dortmund, you're an experienced footballer, just go with the flow. Leave it. But then the other part of me thinks, go on, get stuck in.
It's
anyway. He was subbed off 5 minutes after that, probably for his own benefit.
Matt, there's one user who has the name Nicht Notwendig. He just joined, and I think that oftentimes very much would be a great nickname for Emre Can. Nicht Notwendig.
Yeah, no. Although we asked Nico Schlotterbeck about that as well, because obviously Schlotterbeck himself is very much a sort of a second captain sort of figure for Borussia Dortmund. So I thought his opinion of his captain's performance today would have been interesting, and he said that he was straight up. He said, "Yeah, Emre is an aggressive player, but we like aggressive Emre." And Nico Schlotterbeck would not have it any other way.
I think this kind of stuff, today it worked, right? It won, but it is the sort of thing that puts you on thin ice when the result isn't there. And I think it's such a fine line, and Emre Can walks that fine line. Sometimes well and sometimes not well, right? He is someone who gets stuck in these controversies all the time. And so, yeah, it is something that in this game, I think it worked, but there's so many times where I'm thinking Emre, why are you doing this? And I mean, Stefan, you and I have that discussion all the time, right? Where he gets stuck into situations and it just causes more trouble than is necessary.
I'd say about 90% of the time I'm watching Emre Can play football, I'm usually saying, Emre Can, why are you doing this? But yeah, only to kind of add what he said there, and this is obviously something Matt wouldn't have noticed at the stadium, but in the live coverage, they kind of cut back to his reaction because they showed a clip of Niko Kovac gesturing to him. He was getting subbed off, and he kind of turned around, looked quite angry, and then obviously shouted over to Nico Schlotterbeck to give him the captain's armband. And you could tell he was really disappointed about having to come off. And like, it's all fun in games now because they obviously won this game. But like, if Union Berlin go and snatch an equaliser or maybe go and win this game after Emre Can has to come off, it's a huge problem because he's the captain, and Kovac can't be making changes to his plans mid-game because his captain might get sent off. And it's not a one-off. I'm not in the sense that like he always gets booked or anything, but he's always a liability. And I was watching the Leverkusen game before this Dortmund match, and I was really intrigued to keep an eye on it because I was wanting to see how Robert Andrich would play because of his disastrous performance in midweek. And I was kind of struck by how similar the two situations are, where both clubs have got teams full of talent, but they're also kind of anchored by these kind of aging central midfielders who've been kind of turned into centre backs and are only really in the team because of their apparent influence and leadership skills and things like that. Because I don't think Emre Can's one of the better central defenders, but it was fine today, and it's probably not worth languishing on it or whatever, because you don't want to kind of make a storm out of a teacup. But and Matt said, sometimes you do kind of need that fight. Sometimes you want a player to kind of start pushing people around and not taking and not being intimidated. But
you're right, definitely. It's all part of the game, and there's a time and place for it. And I do tend to think on balance, away at Union Berlin, at a place like this, when you're going to get a load of abuse, when the atmosphere is on top, it's a very, very dirty place to go. And Dortmund know this from their own experience in the past. You probably do need that. So I think on balance, if you're gonna start having aggro with the fans at any ground in the Bundesliga, then do it here because your team probably need it. And on balance, they got away with that today. So just about okay, I think.
Before we lose you, I had this other question for you, and this is a number that stuck out to me when I went through the stats sheet after the game. The pass completion for Union Berlin was 71%. The pass completion for Borussia Dortmund was just 69%. Usually for like teams in the Bundesliga, you see in the 80s. Did it look that messy to you live?
I'd have to look at the stats in a bit more detail. I think there were maybe a couple of particular culprits who might be responsible for some of Borussia Dortmund's low passing accuracy. One of them would be Joe Bellingham. We thought had another poor game today, unfortunately. And also some of the passing in the final third did break down a couple of times as well. They had a couple of counter-attacks which weren't really sort of played out as neatly as you'd think. So I can only suggest that as a couple of potential reasons for that. Just before you both got on to Bayern Munich, maybe it's just worth mentioning what Lars Ricken, the Borussia Dortmund CEO, had to say about that. He was asked about that game, and he commented that he thinks it's obviously a good thing. It's something that Borussia Dortmund are happy about. They're obviously aware of the result going into today. He thinks it's good for Dortmund. He thinks it's good for the Bundesliga, that it shows that Bayern can be beaten. Not just in the Champions League by a team like Arsenal, but also in the Bundesliga by a team like Augsburg. That was what he had to say about it. Although he didn't go anywhere near as far as mentioning title races or anything like that. Nico Schlotterbeck said that he was keeping a very close eye on the game, mainly because of his brother. And he said he wasn't sure whether Augsburg would really be able to hold on, but he was happy that they did. And he said that he sort of mentioned the idea of a title race a bit more than Lars Ricken did. He said, down to 8 points now. I think that's right. And he said, he just wants to keep in touch and distance for as long as they can. So that's what Dortmund's players and staff had to say about Bayern Munich today.
Title race is on.
Title race is on.
Matt, are you sure?
This is the headline of this podcast.
Are you sure? Are you sure Nico Schlotterbeck didn't make a comment about the lack of defenders in Bayern squad and said I could do a job there?
He was, you joke, he was asked about that, and he said that he did say along the line, paraphrasing, along the lines of the time is approaching where he's going to have to set a deadline to make a decision. So,
okay,
I think we can, maybe expect some movement in that direction.
So instead of the title races on, the headline of this pod is Nico Schlotterbeck to Bayern.
all sorts of headlines today.
Yeah, lots of headlines.
Yeah. No, I think that's great, Matt. I don't want to keep you too much longer because I know you probably have to run, do mixed zone stuff and so on. Say hi to Dan.
Well, I think
Probably somewhere
as
over
you
here.
can see, the mix zone is now finished. They tidied it away. I thought I was going to get in trouble because you're not really allowed to film in here, but I've managed to keep away until it was finished. And I think I've missed the press conference. To be honest.
The DFL never watches this, so how would they ever find out?
Yeah, you definitely do your best to not film anything. I think we could safely say that.
Although the colleague behind me is casting some. He keeps looking at me, that fella.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe it's time to call it a day, lads. So yeah, cheers.
Thanks, Matt.
Right, talk soon, everyone.
Yeah.
Cheers, Matt.
Man. All right. Let's go on to the Bayern game then. Yes, they are defeated, Stefan. I think the fans that celebrated this the most were Bayer Leverkusen fans. The game wasn't even completely finished yet when the result at Bayern Munich came across the wire at the Bayer Arena, and the Leverkusen fans with the big cheer, because that means that record at least will not be a Bayern Munich record, going through an entire Bundesliga campaign undefeated. I guess it was going to happen eventually. Although, having seen Bayern Munich play this year, I had given up hope that they would be beaten eventually. They seemed so steady, so very strong. I didn't think that there were many teams that could put up the sort of performance that Arsenal put up in the Champions League. There was moments last week when I was in Leipzig where I thought, especially in the first half, maybe Leipzig were going to do it. But that the last 25 minutes or so where Leipzig completely fell apart kind of made me think, this is a really hard team to beat. But it's now happened. It's also happened against a team where in the first half of the season, the head coach was still Sandro Wagner, and he said, my team has just as much quality as Bayern Munich. And then people in the dressing room laughed, and he said, well, you'll see. So I guess Sandro Wagner is no longer the Augsburg coach, but maybe he was right.
Yeah, well, that's kind of an interesting thing, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
We obviously joke that, Augsburg are the minnows of the Bundesliga and of Bavarian football or the Bundesliga, whatever, but they did put up a really good fight against Bayern at the start of the season. And I did go into this match expecting them to score. I don't know why, but I did, and I have the betting slip to prove it. And I made a joke in the subscriber chat during the game, and indeed after the Augsburg goal, and I said one of the safest bets to put on right now in Bayern Munich games is that both teams will score. In fact, I did check before we came on air here, and they've only kept 2 clean sheets in the last 10 league games, and it is quite startling. Now, I mean, I think there's 2 things behind that. Obviously, there's the huge amount of injuries that they have. Obviously today they were playing with Davies and Ito at fullback, and before that they've had all sorts. They've had Bischoff, and they've had Kimmich, and I mean, I guess Tarek Konrad Leimer is still considered maybe a kind of a midfielder who has been converted into a fullback, even though he does very well at that job. But it's an issue that has been there from day one with Bayern, at least since the start of the season. And I guess at this point it's now kind of coming back to bite them. They're probably one of the few teams in the world that seem to have an abundance of left backs, but no actual right backs. Because if you consider Ito, you've got Davies, you've got Guerrero, you've got Bischoff, so you've got at least 4 guys there who can kind of fill in there. Kimmich obviously wasn't fully fit to start this game at right back, so he couldn't do the role there. So I guess Davies did it. So you've kind of got just the very simple numbers of players being injured, and company just not really having too many options there. And you could maybe kind of go all the way back to the start of the season and question why Bayern didn't do more about that. Obviously, they went into the season with one actual fullback in Sacha Boey, and as we've reported a number of times in this podcast, he's been injured since he joined Bayern, and he was injured before he joined Bayern. He came to the club with pre-existing conditions, which is why he hasn't been able to play much. And I mean, I guess technically company could say, look, I've got Stanisic there, I've got Konrad Leimer there, I'll be fine. But injuries to both of them has now meant that And of course, Boy being out, as he always is, means that they've struggled there. But I kind of got a bit of heat at the start of the season for saying, Konrad Laimer's not good enough right back for that position. And I do understand that he has done very well for Bayern since then, but it doesn't really get away from the fact that even if Laimer does a decent job there, he's still only one actual fullback for that position, because I know Stanisic can play that role, and he did it for Leverkusen as well previously, but I don't think of him as a top-class fullback. He's a guy who can do a very good job there for sure, but like, if I was Bayern, if I was, Max Abel building a squad, I wouldn't be sitting there thinking we don't need a right back because we've got Stanisic, Maybe maybe that is what they have done, and that's what they should do, but I think that's the kind of issue. So there's just a simple issue of numbers. And then the other issue as well is, I think, just general malaise, general fatigue. We both watched their game against Union Saint-Gilloise in the Champions League in midweek, and we did a show after it, and they looked really kind of lethargic. They looked like they were kind of just going in first gear. They weren't really getting up to top speed. I think if there's another team that had a bit more bite than the Belgian side did, I think it would have caused them some issues. Granted, it was a kind of dead rubber because Bayern were already through, so you don't want to kind of read too much into those performances, but sometimes if you kind of get a bye game like that and no one's really going at 100%, it's actually quite hard to raise yourself a few days later for a game that does matter. And, for a club like Augsburg, this is a cup final. Every time they play Bayern, it's like a cup final. You can tell that they obviously want to win these games. They want to cause an upset. And they almost did it at the start of the season, and they got to do it tonight at the Allianz Arena. So fair play to Augsburg. And now, for the first time, Manu, in 323 days, Bayern have lost a Bundesliga game.
So how many days?
323.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I can say is, and I'm looking at the stats here, the only time I've seen Bayern Munich in trouble this season was when they were outperformed or outworked, right? This was the case when I was in Berlin for the game at the Alte Försterei, where they rescued a late 2-2 draw, and Union Berlin outworked them, and Augsburg outworked them today. They ran a full kilometer more, which in Bayern Munich, when you play against Bayern Munich, means you have to run 124 kilometers. That is, by the way, 10 kilometers more than either Dortmund or Union Berlin ran today. So just to put that in perspective, right? So, and I think this is why it makes it so hard to beat Bayern Munich this season, is because not only do they have more talent, they also work harder than their opponents. Which is, of course, brings us back to the debate that we had at the beginning of the season. How long can you play like that with a squad that isn't as big as, say, like the top Premier League team squads, right? How long can you maintain this consistent style of play where you are not only outplaying your opponent, but also outworking them, while not really relying on a lot of players? And you see that with like Harry Kane, for example, right? How deep he drops at time. You see it, how much the defenders have to work. And, that raises the question is like, what happens when this breaks down? And so, yeah, I think today Augsburg simply outworked them. And, also you need a little bit of luck. Like that situation at the very end where Michael Olise does the Arjen Robben. And he does the Arjen Robben like pretty much as well as Arjen Robben, sometimes even better. But that ball just hits like that very top corner of the crossbar, right? And ricochets out. And that very same situation against Union Berlin, that was a goal, right? Like Harry Kane converted his chance in the very last minute. So eventually that was going to cover to catch up with Bayern Munich too, that moment where they maybe don't get a goal in the very last second. And so we're now in the situation where they have finally lost the game. I'm not sure, we joked around this earlier, like, is that going to make a difference in the title race? I don't think so. I think they're just too consistent, right? Dropping 8 points from here to the end of the season to Borussia Dortmund, and also having Borussia Dortmund not drop points themselves seems a monumental task if you're anyone else. But I do think it is a warning sign as Bayern Munich transition into the spring, as the games become more, as the championship games become bigger, that there is cracks in how you can beat them. And as fatigue sets in, especially with the Club World Cup in mind as well, I think there's going to be some issues here.
Yeah, I mean, I made a joke on social media about the Bundesliga title race being back up and running because there's only 8 points in it now. But yeah, of course, you're right. I mean, they do have Hoffenheim in a couple of weeks, and then they've got to go away to Dortmund and Leverkusen before the end of the season. So, never say never, but you would suspect that they'd have most of these players back. I'm going to read some of the comments actually we've got, because I see a few Bayern fans in the chat, and Aditas talk referring to my Stanisic point. It says Stanisic also played in the back five, which is absolutely spot on. He says, is Bayern's outside back absence a surprise susceptibility? The left back, right backs were not great defenders, but in a team like Bayern that defends on the front foot, and the substitute left back and right back don't contribute to attacking, not defend, and best making Bayern look particularly ineffective. I think I've absolutely butchered your point there, Adita, but I think you're absolutely right. I think in terms of, bringing on guys like Ito and stuff like that, just don't really bring as much as an actual fullback or a wing back, which is absolutely spot on. And I kind of agree with you in terms of Stanisic as well. I think he lacks that as well. Tor says, is it just me, or have Augsburg played very, very well versus Bayern in the last 2 years? Yeah, we touched on that. Obviously, did very well at the start of the season. And he also says, this is the only thing that could kill this Bayern season is the injuries, and the difference in injury amount between Dortmund and Bayern is insane. And yeah, it's absolutely spot on. And I think what we have to maybe touch on here in terms of the injuries is, because we both have Bayern fans being like, what is going on? Why are we cursed? Why is this team suddenly cursed? And we don't really know what's going behind closed doors. Maybe there's too many potholes at the Bayern training ground or something. I don't know. But
I think it's the work rate, Stefan.
Well, yeah, of course, the work rate. But the point I was going to make was, it's also the tiny squad. Like, these guys will be the workload in their legs will be so much more than the likes of Dortmund players or other teams in the Champions League, obviously, because they've got players who can rotate in and out of the team. I mean, I haven't got the numbers in front of me, but I reckon if you check which players have got the most minutes in the Bundesliga this season, there'll be a lot of Bayern fans or Bayern players probably at the top of that. But I think the concern isn't just these guys that are picking up injuries. It's the fact that the guys who are stepping in simply aren't good enough. And I think tonight, and I think the midweek game was a good example of two players who really stand out to me here. Kim Min-jae and Leon Goretzka. So, I mean, we can talk all night about the lack of fullbacks, and it's absolutely spot on, but I can't remember the last time Leon Goretzka had a good game for Bayern Munich. And I think he's kind of developed into this role of being, I think when he was at his absolute best, he was the best box-to-box midfielder in the world, or one of the best box-to-box midfielders in the world, a player who could obviously get stuck in because he's a physical specimen of a man. He's a gladiator. So he can win headers, he can win tackles, he can shove players off the ball. But, he is at his heart a very technically gifted attacking midfielder. He came through at Schalke as like a number 10, as a playmaker. So in his peak in that Hansi Flick team, he was a player that could do both things. But it just feels to me with Goretzka, he's lost that pace, he's lost that edge, and a player that could do everything very well has suddenly become a player that doesn't really do anything very well. And he kind of sits in that Bayern midfield, and it's hard to tell what he actually does. You can obviously see what Pavlovic is doing, what Kimmich is doing when he's there, because he's kind of pulling the strings. But it feels to me like Goretzka is just kind of chasing shadows. He's chasing the game. He's not having a real influence on it. And I think that's a huge problem, because when he has to step in for a Kimmich or whoever else, they're in trouble. And of course, Kim Min-jae, who wasn't very particularly good in this game either, who was dreadful in midweek. It feels like he and the club are just kind of killing time until they can go their separate ways in the summer. And that in itself is a huge problem, and I know hopefully when everyone comes back from injury, like someone like Stanisic can kind of come in and take his place in the pecking order at centre back. But I think that's probably one of the reasons behind this performance and the one against Union Saint-Gilloise, that, yes, you have your Olises and your Diazes and your Harry Kanes and things like that, but they can only do so much if the guys at the centre of that team aren't doing particularly well. And I always say this, and it's something I do believe, that football's a weak link sport, and what that means to me is that if two teams are well balanced, it's the team with the worst player in their team that will ultimately impact the game. And if Goretzka and Kim just aren't the players that they used to be for one reason or another, then Bayern will continue suffering. And that's a very real consequence of this very small squad and injuries, I think.
So while you were talking, I looked up some of the stats. So Bayern Munich are first in the Bundesliga with 2,353.6 kilometers covered, which is 60 kilometers more than the second team, which is Augsburg.
Well,
yeah, that's actually really interesting, right? But it's also the gap between them and Bayern Munich is quite substantial. So Bayern Munich are leading the league there by a lot, which is usually quite uncommon. It's usually teams that fight against relegation that lead the stat. Having said that, they don't have any players in the top 20 for most distance covered. The player that covered the most distance for Bayern Munich is ranked 23rd, and it's Harry Kane, which is actually also really interesting. Harry Kane is the Bayern Munich player that covers the most distance, ahead of Michael Olise and Joshua Kimmich. They have a lot of players that, most teams have like one or two players that like stand out, that cover a lot of distance. But, Bayern Munich have a lot of players in that middle pack that so the workload is evenly spread. But yeah, Harry Kane is 23rd with 194 kilometers covered, which is not exactly something you would expect from a center forward. And if you're an England fan and a Bayern Munich fan hoping to be in the later stages of the Champions League and be successful, that is a stat that should worry you.
Yeah. And you know what's also interesting, Manu? I'm checking Transfermarkt for players that played the most minutes. And do you know which Bayern players have played the most minutes in the Bundesliga this season? Which
I would say Harry Kane and Michael Olise and Luis Diaz, I would say.
Diaz has played the most minutes, followed by Harry Kane, followed by Olise. And only one Dortmund player has played more minutes than those three players, and that's Vladimir Anton and Gregor Kobel, but I'm not counting goalkeepers because they don't really count. And I think that's really, really telling. I think there's then, after those three, you get Nepcha and Svensson, and then it's Jonathan Tah. So, that obviously makes sense because Bayern have had injuries in midfield and defence, so they have had kind of moved players in. But the fact that those three have played basically as much as they have is impressive and incredible. But it definitely goes to show the kind of folly or the kind of consequences of having this very, very small squad. And, we did say on the kind of, I think it was midweek show, maybe last week, that, look, Davies is returning, Musiala is returning. Musiala obviously played in this game. As the Davies, obviously, things should be all right, but they're going to have a few hiccups from time to time. And, look, a defeat at Augsburg is not the end of the world. It's embarrassing. They've got a bit of egg in their face because they lost at the Allianz Arena, but they've still got an 8-point gap, and they just have to make sure they don't have this number of injuries when it comes to the knockout games, I guess.
I actually almost wonder if like this defeat could be a blessing in disguise, because I know that Bayern Munich are consumed by the fact that they don't own the record for being the only team to have won the Bundesliga without a defeat. And so, but now like they can't get that record anymore this season. You know what I mean? So if you can't get it anymore, you might as well bugger off some Bundesliga games here and there in the name of maybe winning the Champions League, right? Because the title is probably secured. And if you can't win the title undefeated, what's the point of, smashing opponents 6-7-0 with your best starting lineup every week? So I actually wonder if with that monkey off the back, and maybe having to try again next year to finally get the record, or if they're ever going to get it, because it's extremely hard. I mean, there's a reason why Bayer Leverkusen were the first team to ever do this. I wonder if this company is now going to say, well, we can't get that anymore, so maybe it's time to give Kane a little bit of a rest. It's time to give Michael Olise a little bit of a rest in some of these league games. And probably something that needs to happen anyways, but now there's maybe more motivation towards doing it. Because I just know the Bayern bosses would want to have that record because they're all consuming. They want every record there is, right? That's how it works. It's literally in the national. It's literally in the anthem. The national anthem. The Bayern Munich song is not the national anthem of Bavaria. Even though Bayern.
Thank God.
Probably Bayern fans probably believe it should be.
I believe it's one of the most cringiest songs I've ever heard at a football stadium, so I'm glad it's not. But yeah.
But Stefan is fine. Langer, harter Weg.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Like I said, I think we can kind of take this all in context. I think the key thing is that they're in a bit of a rut. They're struggling with form, but they should be okay Bundesliga wise. Like I said, I think they've got a couple of games before they play a team like Hoffenheim, who, by the way, have now got more points than any other team. No, they're level now with Bayern for points won in the last 10 match days in the Bundesliga, which is incredible. Picked up a big win today as well, actually, which unfortunately we won't have a chance to talk about. But they should be fine in terms of kind of, just navigating these kind of troubled waters. And it'll be key to making sure they've got, I don't know if Konrad Laimer will be back for the group stage or the knockout games, but, Kimmich should be back. Stanisic perhaps will be back. And, Upamecano, importantly, will be back, so I think they're going to be absolutely fine. But, it's nice to see that, they can bleed from time to time and that they aren't immortal.
Yeah, Hoffenheim is a great story, one that we can probably dig into this upcoming week because we have 2 makeup games on Tuesday, Bremen against Hoffenheim and then St. Pauli against Leipzig. And I think that might be a good time to talk about Hoffenheim, who went from relegation candidates to firmly in the Champions League race. It was one of those really underreported stories in German football, and one that we should probably pay attention to. All right, Stefan, I think that does it for this part of the main show. If you're listening to it live, this is it. But if you're listening to this after the fact, we're now gonna go to a segment that Matt and I did after the Hamburg derby. That's going to be passed into this show. So yeah, enjoy that part.
I've been told that some people listening or watching from where it's -17, so I'm not going to complain about that anymore. 0-0 for Hamburg. It's only the third away point of the season. And there's other away points that also came in 0-0s, away at Gladbach on the opening day and away at Union Berlin. So Hamburg absolutely have form for this. In the first half, they were a better team. They did edge it. It certainly wasn't a brilliant game, but they did edge it. But they were showing all the issues that we've seen Hamburg showing all season, really. I think they tried to play football more so than St. Pauli. There were attempts to try and play the ball through midfield and create chances. You have to give them some credit for that. But ultimately, as everyone would have seen, just so blunt up front. The 2 major chances that they had through Yatta and through Downs, both produced saves from Vasil in the Pauli goal.
So,
but ultimately, both of them offside positions.
Matt, I hate to rain on your parade, but the XG of this game was 0.26 versus 0.25. So if you're talking about chances here, I think
that's what I mean. But that's what I mean. That's what I mean. It's 2 chances, but they came from offside positions. That's my point.
Yeah,
that they were attempting to play the ball through, but the 2 chances that came were ultimately from offside positions. So they're obviously not going to feed into to the XG. I think the best thing you can say about HSV really after that was ultimately the defending. I thought every time that St. Pauli did try and make small forays forward, I thought the 3 at the back, Vuskovic, Torunariga, and Capaldo were really, really solid, particularly Vuskovic. I think Kutz a really, really calm and really, really impressive figure at the back. Not that he had a great deal to deal with from St. Pauli, particularly in that first half. It did get better for St. Pauli after the break, slightly. I think the introduction of Ricky J. Jones just as I know Manu's going, yeah, I know we are scraping the barrel here, absolutely scraping the barrel. I'm looking for positives from a St Pauli point of view. I thought the introduction of Ricky Jones did change things a little bit. I did a bit more up front. He put Hamburg under a little bit more pressure with his pressing game, and particularly Jackson Irvine coming on in the 60th minute around about, but. As I said, he only got back into training on Tuesday. He's clearly not really fit. There were doubts whether he'd really make the squad or play much of a role today. You can see that with his quality and with his experience and the way he controls the game and the way he links up passing moves, he does add something there in midfield that St Pauli don't have. But again, we're scraping the barrel. There were a couple of combinations down the left-hand side which Irvine tried to thread through. But yeah.
Matt,
scraping the barrel is the thing today.
Can I ask you something about when you look at the Bundesliga table, right? And HSV have a game in hand, right, going into this match day.
Yeah,
and so do St. Pauli because of the snowy conditions right after the winter break. But when you are HSV and you are 5 points ahead of St. Pauli, and still are, right, because of the result today. And this sounds, when I look at the match data after the game and I see St. Pauli have outworked HSV, right? They ran a full 6 kilometers more, which is quite significantly more. In both teams, not with great running stats, period. 121 versus 115 kilometers run. But St. Pauli was the team that was working harder for this. If you're HSV and you come out of Millantor, is this you basically saying to yourself, yeah, job done? We're basically ensured that they didn't close the gap.
Potentially, but I think it's a mischance from HSV as well. I mean, I think to an extent, St. Pauli's running stats can be explained a bit more by more Hamburg possession and more passing. So they were chasing the game a little bit more. But again, we are scraping the barrel there. Like I said, HSV, but as we've seen in recent games, so blunt up front. This was probably, in terms of lack of threat up front, just as bad as the performance at the weekend against Borussia Mönchengladbach. I don't want to play that performance down too badly. It was probably, in many areas of the field, defensively in midfield, probably the best performance of the season. They were all over Borussia Mönchengladbach. They created a lot more chances there than they did today. But they're simply not finishing them off. And it is frustrating from a HSV perspective that you see in the second half, they make a triple substitution, bringing on Jean-Luc Dompe, Ryan Philippe, Robert Glatzel. On tape, should be worried about the wiring to the ceiling. We'll get onto the Millantor Stadium in a bit.
What's going on behind you there? What's that? Well,
Oh no, that's just a TV coming through the vision.
Yeah, that's fine.
When you bring in on attacking players of that caliber, theoretically on paper, I think you expect so much more. But I mentioned to a colleague sat next, we were huddled together on the press box here. About 10 minutes after Jean-Luc Dompe came on the pitch, we wondered had he actually touched the ball at that point. A couple of counter-attacks down the right-hand side, which Ryan Philippe just completely wasted. And I'm not really sure if Robert Glatzel particularly played a role either. But that has to be frustrating because clearly Merlin Polzin had theoretical attacking options there in that squad. But
how many touches do you think Dompe had over the entire course of the game?
He came on in around about the 60th minute, 68th minute. I'm gonna guess. I don't know, 5, 6.
I mean that would be extremely low. He had 11 touches, which is
okay. I'm not far off.
For a midfielder. That is extremely low. Even
really poor, really poor, and really frustrated because we've seen in the second division, and obviously it is a different division. But in the second division, he was hugely impressive. So we know what he can do. Ryan Philippe has scored goals for Eintracht Braunschweig. We know what he can do. Again, albeit second division. Robert Glatzel, again, I suppose second division, has scored goals in the past. But it is absolutely frustrating. Lokonga came on later on past that, but again, I think similar to the Irvine situation with St. Pauli, probably not quite fit for the time being. So, Yeah, I think frustrating. And I think towards the end, I put in the chat, and I think, you laughed and said you'd be surprised if anything happened. But I actually saw it towards the end. It wouldn't have surprised me if St Pauli had nicked it, because to their credit, finally, after 75 minutes of doing absolutely nothing, they did finally start applying some pressure. And I thought for a second that Daniel Hoyer Fernandez in the Hamburg goal, who does not like this stadium at all, you can tell, and I think the crowd here know that. If anyone is wondering what that might be linked to, just think back to the last Hamburg derby that took place here at the Millantor, and just try and jog your memory and recall what Daniel Hoyer Fernandez did on his goal line and booted the ball into his own net. And I think the crowd here knew that. There was definitely some whistles and shouts whenever the ball went near him. And I've got a note down here towards the end of the game. I think it was I can't remember who made the header, but it didn't look particularly dangerous. But Hoyer Fernandez is stumbling around and only just about managed to tip it over the bar. And I thought,
that's a temperature, Matt. Like, he hadn't much to do, right? Like, no temperature and not much to do. It's brutal for a goalkeeper. Right.
Maybe you genuinely can put it down for that. He should have gone and got some of the pyrotechnics out of the Hamburg end and to warm himself up. But having said that, too, it must be said, in fairness to him, after that he did actually pull off a very good save. Yeah. I can't remember who had the shot for St Pauli, but he did keep it by the end with two good saves. So, like I said, I wouldn't have been surprised if St Pauli had actually been the ones to nick that, given how offensively blunt Hamburg were. And if Hamburg were, like I said, were waiting for offensive substitutions to change the game and add that extra spark up front, did not work at all. And that has to be a concern.
Can I ask you, like, I watch this game every year because it is one of the big games in German football. And, when it happened in the second division, it is also a game that's shown, like, if whether I'm in Germany or in Canada, this game is shown on television, right? Which just, like, underlines the importance of this match on a match day calendar. Again, whether it's in the Bundesliga or the Zweite Bundesliga. And this is the quietest I've seen on the field when it comes to a Hamburg derby. This game was probably the most lackluster Hamburg derby I've ever experienced. And I've been around for a while. So,
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
I think it's a fair point. I mean, it certainly didn't start that way. There was that crunching tackle from Dźwigala on Russing.
Oh, that's what I thought. Like, that's what I thought. Like, let's go.
Minute.
This sets the tone, right? Like,
exactly.
This sets the tone, and it's like, hey boys, let's go. Like, this is a derby, and then it was just like, rather than setting the tone, it was like putting the needle in the air balloon.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel so. I don't know if maybe there was a feeling that if that had been the game for St Pauli to then effectively injure Russing Lillesheet effectively, whether that maybe changed the mental approach, because it might be a derby, but they're still professionals. They don't want to go injuring each other. And like I said, I thought conversely, I think I mentioned it before, the way that Hamburg defended, and this is to the credit of Capaldo, Torunariga, and in particular Vuskovic. They didn't need to resort to anything like that. I thought the three of them were really, really classy, and perhaps it's the logical conclusion from a pretty eventless 0-0 draw that three defenders were the best players on the pitch. But there you go. That's football, and that's what we've seen today.
I think Vuskovic is always worth tuning into. He's already, I actually think, like, when we think about it, he's probably already one of the best defenders in the Bundesliga period. And
really, really impressive.
He's obviously playing for a club that, I mean, they joked on the commentating box today that, like, oh, it'd be great if HSV could keep him. I'm like, sorry guys, but he's probably going to skip Tottenham. He's not even going to go back there. Like, when you think about who's in it for him now, right? I see links to Bayern Munich now with Luka Vuskovic. I mean, watching him play is already worth tuning into any HSV game.
So,
it makes you wonder why he's there, right? Like, it's just
we are scraping, but this is absolutely. If we're going to give this game a headline or this Substack Live a headline on the we'll call it scraping the barrel, of the Substack. But it is true. If there was a man of the match for me, it was absolutely Busquets. He also, as we've seen this season, he offers that threat up front as well. We all saw his brilliant flick against Werder Bremen a couple of weeks ago, and even today, he probably had two of the best chances or the most threatening moments for HSV. He had one volley or half volley, I can't remember, which he dipped just over the bar, which is a semi-decent effort. He also had a good header from a corner, which is well saved, or albeit straight out of Vasil. So yeah, even going forward, he did provide more of a threat than any of Hamburg's attacking players that they brought on. So
Justin W says was hoping for a bit more from a derby. Yeah. I think we all were, Justin. I think we all were.
Absolutely. And I think people can entitled to be a bit frustrated with it, because on the one hand, we're looking at, you have St Pauli, who they might technically be the smaller club in Hamburg, but they have been in the Bundesliga for over a year. And you would expect them to move on. They tore Hamburg apart at the Volkspark Stadion earlier in the season. If there is something that can be said for this derby today, even though that Hamburg haven't come here and won it, the difference between Hamburg's performance in the derby at the Volkspark Stadion on day 2 of the season compared to this performance here this evening, despite the lack of goals, you have to say it's an improvement. Because if anything, they were the better teams on periods.
For HSV, or do you mean for St Pauli?
Yeah, for HSV. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think with St Pauli, a clear step back, because we all came away from, I think me and Stefan were both writing on the match report that we did from the Volkspark Stadion earlier on. Everyone was really pleasantly and impressively impressed by St Pauli. Must be said, Andreas Hontoji wasn't available today, so I think St Pauli definitely missed his impact. But then again, given the form that Hamburg's defence were in, I do wonder what sort of impact that would really have had. Well, and let's not forget where Hamburg have come from. There's always that caveat. It is a completely new team, and if you look at the positives for them, it's that they've clearly stabilised the defence very well. They play the ball through midfield sort of okay for a bottom half team, and now it's up to Merlin Ponsin to sort out the attack. Maybe you're not going to sort all that out in just 6 months in the Bundesliga. Maybe it's going to take a bit longer, but that's absolutely the job that he's got in his hands now.
Well, to stay in the league, you have to sort your defense, right? I had this argument with Sepp Stafford-Bloor at the beginning of the season, where he said, like, where are the goals going to come from? And I said, don't worry about the goals. Worry about the defending. If you want to stay in the Bundesliga, that is the foundation of everything, right? And I think they Vuskovic, again, wouldn't have to mention him. He's the one that they dropped in there and has done a really good job in that regard. And I look at the table right now. Again, they have a game in hand. Who knows what that result is going to be? But as it stands right now, it's 5 points to the relegation playoff spot, or the first team in the drop zone, which is Heidenheim. But on top of that, they also have a better goal differential than St Pauli, 5 goals better. Mm-hmm. And they have a 12-goal better goal differential than Heidenheim, who's sitting 17th, right? Mm-hmm. That is an extra point, Matt, right? Mm-hmm. And
absolutely.
I think if you had told Hamburg fans, on match day 18th, you're going to be 5 points clear and have a significantly better goal differential than teams fighting against relegation, I think every single person at HSV would have signed that.
Absolutely, that's that classic balancing act that Hamburg are trying to walk this season. We said it before. They're a huge name. Been promoted back to the Bundesliga. They feel it's where they belong. They play against a team like St Pauli, who they consider to be, in terms of size, smaller than them. But the reality remains that they were promoted after 7 years in the second division. They brought in pretty much an entirely new squad, and it's going to take time. I would be, on balance, more concerned about St Pauli. Although the aim for both of them is merely to stay up. And that's, I think, as you mentioned before, it's necessary for the Bundesliga too. The football might not have been brilliant today, but if I'm coming across slightly more upbeat about the spectacle, maybe that's because I was fortunate enough to have actually watched it here where that you have more to entertain you than just the action or lack of action on the pitch.
The fireworks were awesome. That came across well on television. But that is maybe also my frustration if I was a St. Pauli fan, and I'm sure some of our listeners are St. Pauli fans. The Milan tour, and again, I'm going to age myself terribly, but when I was in the 1990s, there was this joke that, players would say, players would stand next to St. Pauli players and say, oh, we hate how long the walk is from the dressing room to the field. And the St. Pauli player would say back, well, don't worry about it. On the way back, you're going to get carried. That was the sort of thing that you would have to experience as an away player at St. Pauli. You would get booted off the grounds. The fans would give you hate, all that sort of stuff. And I just didn't see that today. And if I
feel it's a slightly different experience these days. I mean, even admittedly, the press box is in among some of the posher seats, but the very fact that the posher seat even exists at St. Pauli, the very fact that there's people sat around me carrying their bags from the St. Pauli fan shop where they've been out on a shopping tour. It's not maybe the stereotypical fan culture that St. Pauli are aiming for.
On the field, I remember Mehmet Scholl doing interviews after the game and saying my shins, I cannot present my shins today because they're bloodied and blue. And that was to be expected when you played there. And it's just,
like we said, to his credit, or maybe not, Adam Drigala did attempt that in the first 6 minutes today, but that's about as far as it went.
It's got soft, Matt.
Must be said though. I mean, off the pitch and to actually be in here, fantastic spectacle. I must. I'll let you into a little secret before this press conference starts.
You have to go.
I've finally done something here. I've been watching, covering and writing about German football all over the place for the best part of 10 years now, to every ground. But for some reason, and there's no reason for it, it's just I've never made it. I've never actually come here before. So for the first time in all this time, I finally made it to St. Pauli. So it's good because I feel like it's the first question. It's my fault. Yeah, I feel like it's the. I'm finally going to get some of my street cred back. It's the first thing anyone asks. People always ask, "Oh, I've been to St. Pauli, great." I'm like, great, but no, never been.
I let you in on a secret. I have not made it to St. Pauli yet either. It's very high on my list.
Right, okay. Now all the secrets are coming out.
I'm missing 2 Bundesliga stadiums. I'm missing only 2. One is Heidenheim, and the other one is St. Pauli. So
right, well, there you go. As of today, there's no winner on the pitch, but I've won that one. I'm now complete.
Well done, Matt. Well,
thank you. I'll take it.
We should let you go. I'm sure you will have more on this game for the Monday Bulletin, and then of course later next week.
There will be more,
on the newsletter as well. And also, we're gonna put this segment into the main podcast as well. So for those of you who listen now, this is nice first tip exclusive on the main show. For the rest of you, you're going to get to listen to this on Sunday or Monday. So anyways, Matt, you got to run.
No, nice one. Cheers everyone for joining in. This is a similar number to what we had after the Dortmund game. I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's a nice idea. And I mean, football's football, isn't it? We can't always guarantee a brilliant game, but we'll always have a good chat about it. And I've actually warmed up now. I've got a radiator next to me, so I'm going to stay here.
Right.
That friend, my friend who finally got a ticket, she is freezing. She's just texted. But at the last minute, she got a ticket in the away end at the last minute. So something good has come out of it. She enjoyed herself.
Something good has come out of it. All right, Matt, you have to run. Talk to you soon.
Okay, ciao everyone.
Bye.